Last night, thank you for lunch today. Appreciate that. You know, this room brings back fond memories. Years ago, we had a little club called the Bluegrass Farriers Association, and our fearless leader, Bob Smith, was the president. And so we decided, since they built this building to have wet lab demonstrations up here, we decided to bring a horse down here and do handmade shoes and shoeing. We'll burn the shoes on it. In the middle that the fire department was called because we set the alarms off. And my old mentor, Dr. Rudy, was pretty pissed off about that, so we didn't need to come back to the Lux Center for our meetings for a while. I will try to keep this short. We have 20 minutes, 25 minutes to get through it. So I've got to carry on. I'm really glad that my colleague from across the pond has finally realized that horses' feet are not symmetrical. They do like to have matched pairs, and the symmetry of them, i.e. normal conformation, having a little set, will show you that the middle of the frog to the lateral side is a bit more than the middle of the frog to the medial side. The outside whole quarter is a bit rounder, the inside's a bit less, a little tighter, a little less rigid. So I'm glad that we have been able to chunk away at that and get some information, valuable information into Dr. Curtis. We appreciate that. No, I say that because competing, if you compete with a British judge, you got to make your shoes symmetrical. There's no rights and lefts. Anyway, it's good to have Dr. Curtis here. I'm so proud of how he's developed. In the Port Trial in Wales, or wherever he's from. So again, I just kind of wanted to, I've been asked to talk a little bit about shoes and how they interact with the surface. Mike did a great presentation this morning about showing us an inside look at the specific mechanics inside feet. I'm glad that we all agree that feet are different and the way that horses move are different, so it's very dangerous to think that and take a hard on horses move this particular way. So these are the points that I like to make in this lecture, to be brief. I'd like to review the normal phases of the stride, talk about what normal locomotion is specific to galloping horses. Talk about the differences in the strike phase and the slide phase between dirt and synthetic surfaces. Now, we only don't have all of the synthetic surfaces. Most of the ones that I'm representing here are the Polytrack version. I'd like to also bring up a really important feature that I've kind of struggled with a little bit with the racing industry, and that's that the direction of force of the hind limb. We all know that horses are rear-wheel drive animals. There is some research out there to show that they do have some propulsion ability in the front limbs, especially at certain times of the race. But for the most part, they're rear-wheel drive animals. And I'd like to show you that the propulsion phase of that is different than a human. And in a human, we tend to look at things at a 45-degree angle, starting off with a starting block. We tend to anecdotally relate that to hoof prints in the dirt and think the same thing goes on. So I want to talk about that. I'd like to just revisit toe grabs. I think it was really good work that Sue Stover started and Al Kane did in 1996 to show us through epidemiological research without really much argument that toe grabs on the front feet of racehorses are definitely a causal factor to musculoskeletal breakdowns. So I think that's important to revisit just a little bit. And then we're to talk a little bit about some strategies that I've used and had some help here with Chris Beamer and Steve Norman over the years to help me nail up some of my goofy shoes and see if they work or not, and see if when we filmed them that would be that they're part of the shoes. So let's do a little locomotion review. So the different phases of the stride, and the phases of the stride I'll say are a controlled sequence of limb loading and unloading from footfall to footfall. And we can break it up a lot of different ways. Terminology can be broken up into the stance phase and the swing phase, the support phase and the swing phase. I'll break it down into the support phase and the swing phase, but within the support phase, there's different phases. The phase when the horse hits the ground, when the leg hits the ground. We used to think, in racing it was all about traction for a long time. And we also used to think that hitting the ground was the major impact, or that violent impact of the ground that caused all the problems. We'll see with some good work by Dr. Jeff Thomason up at the University of Guelph, he's shown us that may not be precisely right. How important the slide phase is and how we can affect it with either shoes and with the surfaces. And I think a big thing is to just understand the consequences of our actions. And in the farrier world, we function on a lot of anecdotal dogma, I'll call it. And it's very hard to break tradition, I found, in that world. But I think that we've been trying and will continue to the more meetings we have like this. Talk about mid-stance, heel off and break over, so we'll go through there. The other aspect of the phases of the stride will be the swing phase. This is when the leg's in the air. Now these are just from one leg, 1 foot to one leg, 1 foot, not the whole animal. So we're not going to talk about the suspension phase where all limbs are off the ground, and then the sequence of events that happen when each leg hits the ground. We're just talking about one limb and the phases of the stride that happen within one limb. So as the horse lifts his leg off the ground, and you'll notice that there's a lot of flexion in the leg, and that flexion of the lower leg is done mostly because of the residual, what we call stored elastic energy that's stored in the suspensory apparatus. Remember, there's no muscles below the knee or the hop, and so even the deep flexor and superficial flexor tendons that are tendons, and they're originating from muscles. They're very long tendons, which gives us an indication that they have a little bit different way of functioning. They also have their check ligaments, the superior and inferior check ligaments that some of the fine work by Dr. Aoki and the Japanese Racing Association has shown us that those flexor muscles, i.e. the deep flexor muscle and the superficial flexor muscle, are fairly non-active at mid-stance. So when the horse is bringing the majority of the weight on the front legs and hind legs, the muscles that are holding this leg up supposedly are not functioning. It's all done through a fairly automated system that we call the suspensory apparatus of both front legs and hind legs. As he picks his leg up, he'll protract his leg forward. That forward motion is called protraction. He gets into that protraction stage that is handled by the upper muscles in the body. So as the residual energy, stored elastic energy, flips the foot and flexes the lower leg, then the more proximal muscles take over and protract the leg forward, extend the limb. At the end of that, the leg flips. We have a little extension. And we can see by the work of Dr. Rooney in 1972 how he showed us the biphasic arc of flight rather than a single nice arc that's published in a lot of farrier books. He's shown us that at this stage the horse flips up. At this stage in time, remember what's happening. The horse may be moving 30 miles an hour, but each foot comes to a complete stop and has to catch up with the body. So if we were to see speed of a horse going like this, we see speed of the foot going like this from 0 to 60, 0 to 60, 0 to 60. So there's a lot of acceleration and a lot of deceleration that occurs in the limbs. It's much faster than our 30 degrees that we may be running. And so at this stage, if I may, Hans, can I have your finger? No fart, Hans. Okay. So at this stage, this is Hans' hand. Imagine if he's loose, all these joints are loose, and that would be the wrong time for me to pop him on the end of that knuckle. It would be better if he was to bring his knuckles together so your bones are all touching. So at this stage, all the joints in the leg are open. The leg is now come and is now starting to reverse direction. So as he starts to reverse, he's being pulled by the extensor muscles and the flexor muscles that, if you remember, attach to the top and the bottom of the coffin bone. So as the leg is retracting down to the ground, the joints are pulled into the closed joint position, which is good for beginning to take load. and the leg is losing velocity or slowing down as it's retracting to the ground. So this is the very important sequence of events that needs to be happened, that needs to be controlled, that does happen, and in spite of horses getting muscle fatigue, their legs are still going where they need to be because of this automatic system that we see in the distal leg. So that's just a little bit of review about the basic phases of the stride. There's a lot of factors that influence the phases of the stride, the timing of them. The slide phase, for example, is a lot longer when a horse is galloping than when he's walking. So they do keep all the phases, but the timing of individual parts of these phases change. Speed changes one. Watch out. So speed is important to change those gaits. Radius of the track and banking of the track is important. I think if you talk to anybody, we'd like to see a little bit more banking. It makes a little bit more biomechanical sense for legs, but it makes no sense to try to keep the track up on dirt up on the track and stuff. So, Dr. Rooney, again, the first director of the Bullock Center, was a big proponent of banking racetracks. The footing is huge. Yielding footing, penetrating footing, hard or moist footing. Conformation is huge. Lameness is a huge factor, and also shoes can be a huge factor in the interaction of the foot to the ground. So this is some work done by Dr. Hillary Clayton. This is the acceleration data. On the bottom, it's an accelerometer. Accelerometers, we've got some good people that could do a much better job of explaining what accelerometer does, but basically this spike means that the foot is stopped. So the foot is stopping very quickly, and the higher the spike basically means the faster the foot is coming to a stop. So it shows it, this little spike here, an acceleration, and this is the force data here that's done by Dr. Jeff Thomason up at the University of Guelph. So thank you guys for letting me use your stuff. This top graph is what I'd like to talk about. So this is the impact. This is when the foot hits the ground. And when we look at this, it's about on this scale here between 3 and 4. And so that tells us that there maybe isn't this violent impact to the ground, but there definitely is huge decelerations. And we can apply the same force in a slow manner and in a quick manner and have two different reactions or results that how fast that same force is applied to whatever you're talking about. So what I'd like to talk about is when the hoof's on the ground, that's only a third of the weight that the limb and the foot's ultimately going to take. But this is a time where we have a sharp decrease in the velocity. We'll have a lot of problems in feet now because remember, as Mike Savoli so eloquently showed us this morning, the movement in the foot. And think of the shear force. I don't know if you guys ever, I don't know what you call it nowadays. It's been a long time since I've raced horses around here, but they call it, some people call it chorial pain. Or after a race, you know, the day after the race, you take your little hammer and tap on the outside of that foot on polytrack versus dirt. Anybody done that? Anybody see a difference? Come on, guys. Tapping your handle on the front of the hoof ball after a race on synthetic versus dirt.
They both flinch.
Huh? They what?
They both flinch.
All on your horses. No, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that when the foot has to come to a stop, the bone is held in place by soft tissue, so there's a lot of shear there. There's one other thing that we haven't talked about that's wicked important, is we've talked about compression, we've talked about tension, but we haven't really talked about torsion. And torsion is a huge factor in the fetlock of horses, as was shown by Mike this morning a bit. And if you look at any cannon bone, at the end of the cannon bone, you'll see the medial joint surface is bigger than the lateral joint, or the lateral joint surface is smaller than the medial joint surface. And so that it's impossible to go in a single plane. That's why when fetlocks load on normal conformation horses, they usually load to the axis, to the center axis rather than the outside axis. That's why when endurance horses run at 100-mile races, a majority of them will have bruising on the medial heel. So it's just that constant concussion. So if this is the phase of where the horse hits the ground, and the big news here is there's not the same amount of weight that's on it as he gets going and throughout the phases of the stride. So here's a pretty good little graph that just shows kind of the same thing on a standardbred track with no cushion. You can see all these high spikes that show a lot of vibrations, as opposed to the dampening of the vibration on a track that has a cushion on it. So there's a stark difference between standardbred and thoroughbred tracks. But one of the main important things is that, like Steve Stannings was talking about, they've got 2 feet on the ground all the time instead of 1 feet. So if you look at this guy go, notice the amount of impact that he has on his feet, and how there's a lot of deceleration there, and his foot comes to a stop very quickly, as opposed to a thoroughbred horse running on a good track, on a nice track. We can see that's a little bit softer landing, but the slide phases is a little bit more. So as a result, we've got a heck of a lot less vibration. Just wanted to show you that I have to, every once in a while, have to deal with people who don't believe that shoes should ever be nailed on a horse's feet. And so these are fairly militant, man-hating, barrier-hating people, shall we say. And we just call them man-haters. But if you look, they'll say that horses need to land on their heels. And a lot of times we'll see horses comfortable flipping their heels. But we're talking about racehorses here that are shitting and getting it, and they're going to the extent of their musculoskeletal system will allow them. And so sometimes they're not going to hit the ground perfectly on both feet, especially if they have what we call asymmetrical gait. So here's a horse that's galloping, and the asymmetrical gait means that although it's a forward gait, he'll land one foot, then another foot, then another foot, and another foot in a diagonal manner, and he'll always have a lead. So his lead leg will have a different stride characteristic than his non-lead leg. So you can see here, the first leg to hit the ground in these two hits the ground toe first. There's more impact, and it slides more. So the slide phase is longer on this guy. There was some research, there's a little bit of work that we did years ago, and we measured how much the slide is on different feet. You can see that the orientation of the limb is different here. The second foot comes in, he's landing heel first. The front foot's landing toe first, hind foot's landing heel first. I think Hans, this was a horse that we did that day that we brought KB boys out, went to Churchill Downs. Yeah. Remember that track was sealed for like 7 days, something like that? And so we did, this was on this day. So you shod this horse, and we talked to him about it. He said he's good. He's a good allowance caliber horse. He's good, no problems, not lame at all. And this is just normal. Huh?
Until I shot him.
And then you shot him. I wanted to just talk a little bit about toe grabs. Don't forget, in 1996, Sue Stover and Al Kane told us that toe grabs were detrimental. It wasn't until 2006 that we made some high-speed videos to show the the Welfare Summit in 2006. What was that called? The Jockey Club Health and Welfare Summit, 2006. So we rented a high-speed camera, filmed a bunch of horses, and showed what happens when you put toe grabs on feet. And it seemed to stimulate a model rule. For a while that we came up with a measurement of 4 millimeters was the maximum that we could have on front feet. Whether the racing jurisdictions have taken that away or not, I think it's up to them. But for a while, what?
It's 2 millimeters now.
It's 2 mil now?
Yeah.
So,
Except California.
where'd the 4 millimeters come from? I thought
It wasn't 4
high.
millimeters, and the week after we said 4 millimeters, we went to 2. Everybody went for it except California.
Oh, okay.
They stayed.
Yeah, that's right. You changed that. So anyway, 2 millimeters.
You're 4 behind.
And it was 4 behind?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the problem with that, guys, was we didn't have any research, science behind hind feet yet. So maybe that's what we should do next. Do a little study on hind feet. So anyway, just to show you a whole bunch of research that talks to us about breakdowns in horses. There's a lot of documented research that talks about catastrophic injuries. injuries and what the relationship is to toe grabs to the suspensory apparatus. And basically, you're anywhere between 15 to 17 times more likely to have a fatal breakdown with regular toes than you will with queen splits. So I remember that year that we did this, and Todd Pletcher, if I'm not mistaken, put all squeak plates on all his horses and one leading trainer that year. Am I right?
Up front.
Up front, not behind.
No, toe grabs been.
So but he took our
Definitely up
advice.
front, he switched.
On the front, he switched, and he's still leading trainer that year. So I think that's pretty good. So just a little schematic here of the normal phases of the stride, and we just need to understand a little bit about the suspensory apparatus to know that when the only reason that the hoof doesn't sink is because we get equal and opposite force on the ground. So whether it's hard ground like this, which it stops on top, or a little bit of a cushion, and it'll sink down a little bit, but it ultimately bottoms out. But before this guy bottoms out on a nice cushion track, we usually see the toe dig in a bit. And the toe digs in a bit, toe down, because what happens is when he starts to load this leg, at the end of this slide phase, the deep flexor tendon and the superficial flexor tendon get tighter. But remember, the superficial flexor tendon inserts about there. The deep flexor tendon inserts here. If it's soft ground, as he loads, the deep flexor tendon wants to pull that bone around. The bone's attached to the wall, and so the whole thing comes around until it reaches enough of resistance that it stops. So it's quite normal to have horses have a positive orientation in their foot, even barefooted, at a gallop on a deep cushion track or on a cushion track. If we kind of put toe grabs on, we've seen that this kind of exacerbates that hoof orientation a lot more. So we know that. Remember now, we've got the suspensory ligament and the superficial flexor tendon that are really at maximum load at mid stance, and the deep flexor tendon is not. So this orientation actually a little bit of a protective orientation for the deep flexor tendon, but again, we still have to bear the same amount of weight. So if we can take weight off of one, it needs to go somewhere else, and it usually goes to the superficial flexor tendon and the suspensory ligament down here. Now remember, we've got the bottom of the main extensor tendon that makes connection with these two extensor branches of the suspensory ligament as well. So at this stage, this fetlock is highly loaded, and there's a lot of tension in that coffin joint at that stage. So I hope that you can see the differences there. Here's I don't know if you can see this. I'd like to slow this down, but I can't see my little finger. What I want you to do to try to see if you can see it is right here for a short amount of time. We have a subluxation of the pastern joint, which should be there. And so remember that Dr. Curtis talked to us about the importance of the straight hoof pastern axis, how when this leg loads, it should load straight through the phalanges here. And this joint surface there, the pastern joint, I want you to think back to Mike's x-ray videos that he had of the loading leg. And what happens is when that pastern drops all the way down, and the short pastern fully loads the digital cushion, and we have an equal and opposite reaction from underneath, so things aren't going to compress anymore. That's when the long pastern and the pastern joint flexes open a bit. That's when that's supposed to move. It's not supposed to flex open halfway down. So if we look at this picture with a toe grab on, and we'll see if we can watch that. Did you see it? I can't see my little thing here. I can grab it and pull it back. I'm on
Yeah, they're taking this straight on the movie part.
We can
There's
see.
it. Can you see it?
Yeah, people
So-
can see. Is everybody seeing that?
What racetrack is that?
Yeah, we're curious.
No
Quarter-
footage.
Yeah, see that?
Quarter horse track.
My point I'm trying to make to you guys is that a toe grab that is meant to hold the horse from losing hold of the track. Whether it does or whether it doesn't, it also provides a snowplow effect that causes that foot to stop sliding when at a point that it needs to slide. There's a lot of forces going through there. It needs to come to a controlled slide. So in farrier we talk about traction. There's two different types of traction. We've got traction that allows us to come to a stop, and then the traction or grip that we need to propel ourselves from the ground. And so we have to understand the consequences of putting a toe grab on, whether or not it provides the backwards traction that we need for propulsion. It certainly affects the slide phase in a negative way. So do square toes, by the way. And this is a little bit slower, but here's a square toe shoe that we've got on this guy. Wanted to measure some stuff. Well, what we saw was, and I hope that you can see it, is that it does cause a little bit of a rise in the foot. It stops, breaks the foot a little bit. The foot slides up in this position and drops back down. So I want you to see if you can see that. Is that evident to you guys? Okay. So again, all I'm saying is just be aware. I think it's our job to do what we can to be aware of the consequences of our actions. So this is just a little square toe shoe, and I wanted to show you that this is definitely not a race blade, but even a square toe shoe is a good idea for a lot of different things that we might use it for. What I would say is nowadays I always try to chamfer this edge and grind or hammer that down so it's at 45, so it doesn't affect the slide disc. We can still have the advantages of a square toe shoe, but we're not also having other actions that we don't want. And it may be that you want that action for some reason. This is just two different horses. Tried to get them as similar as possible, and tried to just give you a good comparison of a queen split with a toe grab. And as I go through here, you can see the slide. These are measured two angles, this angle and the coffin joint angle. And in both of these, as we go all through here, this the fetlock angle is greater than, is more open than the foot with the toe grab on. And also the angle of the coffin joint angle here is a lot more than without a toe grab. Okay, so I wanted to, my big point here is when we're setting up for this huge amount of weight that's come on the foot, that mid stance, we need to be in an orientation to do that in a healthy manner. That's my point. So we can just see there are differences in these 2 feet when the horse is at this stage mid stance. And in this guy, there's very little. There's only a couple degrees difference with this fetlock joint, but there's a huge difference in the coffin joint of these two. Now remember, in the coffin joint, we've got, from the extensor process up here, we see that, and Mike Savaldi talked about the extensor branches of the suspensory ligament. So as this foot flexes, it pulls on the suspensory ligament in addition to just flexing the fetlock joint. Does that make sense? So not only do we flex a fetlock joint, and anything going around that becomes tighter, right? But we're also exacerbating that by the extensor branches sending their 2 branches down, which is tightening it again. Does that make sense? It's making you tighter. You guys with me? With me? Not again, not with me.
Yeah.
So just another thing. I started filming these horses, and I just really changed the way that I view equine locomotion. Some things don't make sense, but usually most horses don't land flat. They land a little lateral side first, and it's quite normal. And horses don't sink their heels into the substrate. Not on deep cushion, not on jump horse, not on any of the hundreds of high-speed videos that we've taken do I ever see heels sink into the substrate. Why? Because of the mechanical action of the deep flexor tendon, and it would do that if we cut the deep flexor tendon, because we know the toe, right? But horses, a lot of time, I hear farriers talk about those heels sinking, like in dressage horses, when they do, you know, some moves where they're back on their hind end, they don't want those heels to sink. Yeah, I don't ever see it. The same mechanics are on the hind foot in that way that are on the front foot. So I just think that we need to understand that whoever designed this creature is a lot smarter than us, and I don't fight it so much. I just try to accommodate it more. This is just kind of a nice little video we took, and just to show that. Just show you how the foot hits the ground with no cushion. Doesn't get a chance to slide much. You can see, hopefully you can see he's landing a little bit outside foot first, just subtly. And here's some cushion. There's a cushion track. How they hit the ground and slide. Just to show you that there's a lot. It's much kinder, I think, on the legs to hit the ground in this environment than it is in a hard environment or any time that we can't slide. Okay, so we'll go to the support base. You can see that we've got at least 3 times the amount of weight on that limb, and still the foot's not moving at all. Point is that at this phase in the stride, when he gets to mid stance, that's where we have 3 times the amount of weight on it than when he is hitting the ground initially. So during this support phase, the foot's decelerating, which is mid stance, and then the hind foot must propel, hind limb must propel its leg forward. I think the orientation of the foot is dependent on the direction and how fast the horse is going, and the direction of the propulsive force is perpendicular to the ground. So here's the main point I want you to understand, that horses don't push back like we do. We have to, our center of mass is here, and we're going to continue pushing through with our calf muscles all the way through here until we push off of our toe. And that's not what horses do. Horses don't move their foot until the majority of the weight is already passed through. He's already moved his center of mass forward, so all he's doing when he turns the foot is lifting his leg out of the ground, as opposed to pushing all the way through that stride. So I need for you guys to understand that. Horses don't push through like starting blocks like we think. And I think that we think that because we look at the footprints sometimes and we see that it's like starting block, right? But think of that. Don't you think as a human, we can take our little fingers and just take and run a furrow in that? And if he was pushing all the way through like us, do you think there'd be big furrows in the ground? That's the way I look at it. So they don't. And Dr. Stover started this work a while ago and got me thinking about it and we're talking now about vector forces, or the forces of push. And we're measuring it now by measuring the ground reaction force. And so this red arrow just shows, I just wanted to show you trends. Just to show you that we've got this is the horizontal force, and this is the vertical force, okay? And so this is just a graph showing a lot and none. This is basically what that is. And so I'm showing you that down here we have a whole lot of horizontal vertical force and our horizontal force, not much vertical force. He's going forward, he's not pushing down much. As we go through the phases, he's starting now, he's loaded. Now I want you to look at the foot and see how the foot is orienting itself. Now this is a synthetic track, a poly track. And we can see now that as he's starting to come to a stop, these forces are becoming equal. The amount of forward or the amount of downward force and the amount that the horse is moving forward are coming into some equilibrium. And as he starts to propel himself, now he's starting he's done at decelerating, and he's going to start accelerating now. And as he's accelerating, look at the orientation of the foot as he goes through these phases. It hasn't moved much. The orientation of the foot is pretty much the same. What I'm just trying to show you is that during this time, these force vectors change, and the multiple or the majority of force is in this leg as he's propelling. You can see over here he's got the weight on the leg is pretty much maximum because he's at mid stance here, And mid stands for a hind limb. The cannon bone is not perpendicular like it is in the front limb. So again, I say the mid stance in the hind leg is not perpendicular. The cannon bone is not perpendicular to the ground like it is on the front leg. Okay, this is mid stance here. This is the lowest point that fetlock is at this point. So this is the highest amount of body weight that is taken, and those forces are into the ground as he starts to propel himself forward and starting to straighten these joints, the hock joint, stifle joint. As he's starting to utilize these muscles of his upper limb, the forces are still going straight into the ground with very little, almost immeasurable forces going in this direction. Yeah. Okay. What about there? So just carry on with this. I just put these markers on the legs so you can see that indeed the leg is at this point, and you can see the foot. Please notice the foot. The foot has not changed its orientation. Now it's changing its orientation right there. Now the heels are off. So we've got heel off, but all of these points, the foot is still the same orientation up till there. And now we've got this great reduction of weight as the foot rolls in the ground, and all of the joints are extended. We can't push anymore because we're done extended. So we can't push in this backwards manner that it sometimes appears.
So there's absolutely no use for a toe grab behind.
Well, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the direction of force is that right there. Okay? So
And
humans,
there is, it'll decelerate your foot faster.
what I'm saying is that you don't get confused. I talk about people talk about how look how you act and how you walk and all that, and there are certain similarities, but there's a lot more dissimilarities than similarities in how a biped moves as opposed to a horse. So at this stage, before the foot even breaks over, the joints are fully extended. There's no muscles available to do any more work, and the joints are already there. And so the propulsion phase is complete before the foot turns in the ground. And so once I realized that, it was to me it was a little eye-opening, because I always thought that horses had a lot more push than that. Yeah.
The difference there is a horse on the treadmill, the body stays in one place and the legs move under. But on the ground, the foot stays in one place while the weight goes over.
Right. Well, anyway, I just wanted to mention a few things. There's some footprints in some dirt, and what basically happens there, that's when it has the toe. The toe is on this side, and the heels are here. So what's happened is as he's finally got his body over and has done all the work he needs to, his toe digs in, rolls over the ground as it should, and then basically lifts out of the ground as opposed to pushing out of the ground. So I thought it was interesting to take a couple pictures of synthetic surface as opposed to a dirt surface. You can see that it is yielding, but it's not penetrating. So I think of walking or running on a synthetic surface a lot more like running on a trampoline. You don't penetrate the tramp, but you do get a lot of give, right? But remember, it is pretty sticky, and that foot's trying to slide over, and it's not able to, and that could present some problems. So anyway, just to show you that, to make that point, as that guy rolls over, he's unloading his leg, and he's lifting it out of the ground. Same, I wanted to show you this on a synthetic surface. Because we have very little slide, I want you to just see what's happening with that foot. Sorry. Can you see the angle of, what is the angle of the dorsal hoof wall at right there, you guys? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Does it look pretty 90 degrees to you? So what I'm saying is, at this stage, these extension branches of the suspensory ligament are wicked tight, which are pulling on the suspensory ligament as well, in addition to that fetlock being loaded more when it runs over the top of this. So saw that mostly. Most of the slide phases that we measured on synthetic were less than an inch, the amount that the foot slides. Average amount of slide on a dirt track, which is an average track, they're all over the map, but is about 3 inches. So that's a huge difference. Bottom just shows you the orientation of the foot of both synthetic and dirt. Years ago, we built some shoes, put them on some feet, recorded these horses. We filmed them, 3 horses. We filmed them with grabs on. They had regular grabs on, didn't they, Chris?
Yes.
Yep, and then Chris was so kind, made these shoes up, Chris nailed them up, we filmed them afterwards, and we were able to show that these shoes were able to increase the slide phase by 100%. So from 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches. And it was amazing to me that top middle sliding plate looking apparatus there, I remember talking to the exercise rider and saying, how did he go? How did he go around the corners? And how did he go back and forth from the barn? He said, fine. He was fine in the corners. He was good to go. I didn't see him having any lack of track, not able to get a hold of track on synthetic. So there you go. I'm a big believer in using shoes to our advantage. So a suspensory shoe, although this is steel, it's not a race plate, we can sometimes apply the same things. This is a horse that is loaded on chipped rubber and loaded to the same amount, and then I didn't believe it, so I added 300 more pounds. On the picture to the right, you can see how the wider shoe, the mechanics of the shoe, can affect the orientation of the foot. That's my main point. You can do with that as you wish. Thanks.